Shadows on the Bar, a short novel. Chapter 1. The Rusty Anchor. The rusty anchor sat perched on the edge of a sleepy coastal town, its weathered clapboard walls kissed by salt air and time. Inside, the amber glow of hanging lanterns spilled over scarred wooden tables, and the faint tang of beer mingled with the sea's briny breath drifting through the open windows. Ava Bennett, 28, moved behind the bar with the ease of someone who'd made it her second skin. Her green eyes sparkled under the dim light, catching the glint of waves beyond the glass, though a quiet shadow lingered in their depths. She wiped the counter with a rag, her slender fingers tracing circles over the wood as if smoothing out the years etched into it. Ava loved this place, the clink of glasses, the low murmur of fishermen swapping tales, the way the jukebox hummed old country tunes. It was her sanctuary, a world she'd carved out after dreams of seeing Paris or painting sunsets had slipped away. But lately, a restlessness stirred beneath her calm exterior, a whisper she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was Mark, her boyfriend of 4 years, who was more a ghost than a presence. A fisherman with a temper as unpredictable as the tides, he spent weeks at sea, leaving her to tend the bar and their fraying life alone. When he was home, his silences were heavy, his words sharp, and their love, once a wildfire, had dulled to embers she wasn't sure she could rekindle. Chapter 2. The Regular. Thursday nights brought Ethan Cole. He slipped through the door like a shadow cast by the moon, always at the same stool near the end of the bar. Mid-30s with dark hair that fell just over his brow and eyes that held a quiet storm. He was a writer, different from the rough-hewn men who filled the anchor with their salt-crusted boots. "Whiskey neat," he'd say, his voice low and smooth, and Ava would nod, pouring the amber liquid with a steadiness that belied the flutter in her chest. He'd tip her with a crumpled bill, his ink-stained fingers brushing the air near hers, and she'd catch the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Working on something new?" she asked one night, leaning against the bar as the crowd thinned. "Always," he replied, flipping open his notebook to reveal pages scrawled with looping script. Their talk started small. Weather, the sea, the way the gulls cried at dawn. But soon they deepened. She told him how she'd once dreamed of leaving this town, of chasing horizons beyond the gray waves. He shared fragments of his novel, a story of two souls meeting too late, their paths crossed by fate's cruel hand. "Sound sad?" she said, and he looked at her, his gaze lingering. "Not if they find a way," he murmured, and something unspoken trembled between them. Chapter 3. The Tension Builds. Weeks passed, and Ethan's Thursdays became Ava's quiet lifeline. He'd linger longer, nursing his drink while the bar emptied, and she'd find excuses to stay near, polishing glasses that already shone, rearranging bottles she'd organized a dozen times. One night, as she slid his whiskey across the counter, his fingers grazed hers. The touch was fleeting, a spark in the dimness, but it lit something inside her she hadn't felt in years. She pulled back, heat flooding her cheeks, and muttered, "Spilled something. Be right back." In the cooler, she pressed her hands to her face, willing her pulse to slow. Mark's face flashed in her mind, his broad shoulders, his steady hands that had once held her through grief. She owed him loyalty, didn't she? But Mark was slipping away. He came home the next week, his duffel thudding to the floor, and announced a rare night out. "Fish and chips by the pier," he said, almost gruffly, as if it were a chore. She wanted to feel the old warmth, but the evening unraveled fast. "You're always at that damn bar," he snapped over greasy fries, his voice cutting through the wind. "Maybe if you were around I wouldn't be," she shot back, and the words hung like storm clouds. They drove home in silence, and she took the couch, staring at the ceiling as Ethan's voice echoed in her ears, soft, steady, a promise she couldn't grasp. Chapter 4. The Crossroads. The next Thursday, the bar was nearly empty when Ethan stayed past last call. The jukebox crooned a mournful tune, and the sea roared beyond the walls. He set his glass down, his eyes locking with hers. "Ava," he said, his voice a whisper over the waves. "I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." Her breath caught as he stepped around the bar, his hand hovering near her cheek. "I have a boyfriend," she said. But the words trembled, fragile as sea glass. He closed the distance and his lips found hers, a kiss that tasted of whiskey and longing, a tide pulling her under. For a moment she let it sweep her away, her hands clutching his shirt. But guilt crashed in like a breaker. "I can't," she gasped, stepping back, tears stinging her eyes. She turned away, wiping her face, and he didn't push. "I'll wait," she said, and the weight of it broke her heart. She wanted to run to him, to choose the unknown over the safe, but Mark's shadow loomed. Years of shared history, of quiet promises. She didn't know how to let go, not yet. Chapter 5. The Climax. A storm rolled in the next night, wind howling through the town like a banshee. Ava worked the bar alone, the rain lashing the windows when Ethan burst in, soaked to the bone. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice raw, and before she could protest, he pulled her behind the bar and kissed her again. This time it was desperate, a collision of need and fear, and she clung to him, the world narrowing to the heat of his touch. But the door creaked open, and Mark stood there, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes narrowing as they took in the scene. "What's this?" he growled, stepping forward. Ethan stiffened, but Ava stepped between them, her heart pounding. "Just closing up," she lied, her voice shaking. Mark's gaze flicked from her flushed cheeks to Ethan's tense frame, and suspicion darkened his face. "Bullshit," he muttered, grabbing her arm. "We're going home." She yanked free, glaring at him. "Not like this." The storm raged outside, but inside the air crackled with everything unsaid. Mark stormed out, leaving the door banging in the wind, and Ethan stayed silent, watching her with those soulful eyes. Chapter 6. Resolution. Days later, Ava sat Mark down in their cramped kitchen. "It's over," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. He stared at her, jaw tight, then nodded once and left without a fight. It wasn't about Ethan. Not entirely. It was about her. About choosing a life that didn't feel like a cage. When Thursday came, Ethan walked in, hesitant, and she met his gaze with a bittersweet smile. "I need time," she told him, and he nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I'll be here," he said, and she believed him. That night, after he left, she poured a whiskey neat and set it on the counter, his empty stool a quiet promise. The sea whispered beyond the windows, and Ava felt it. The stir of something new, a horizon she might finally chase. She wasn't ready yet, but for the first time in years she could see it shimmering in the distance.